When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject: September Sky. User: Santa Sniper. Posted December 14th, 1999.
It's been close to a year since you last heard of me. Another 12 months of opening manila envelopes of mysterious origin. One every time the calendar flips over, then traveling across the country to kill whoever's name happens to be inside. Don't worry, I'm not a psychopath. At least, I don't think I am. Whatever the case, the people I'm sent to kill are definitely worse. Serial killers operate in the wild without any hope of being stopped by law enforcement. Gary Sindel, Pin Trotter, Georgie Postmartin Winbaker. Those are four of the worst men to ever walk this earth, and you don't know a single one of their names because I ushered them off it. Not once in 10 plus years of service have I failed to do the task my unknown employer set out before me, until today. Like a lot of serial killers, Wade Moynihan was nothing to look at. According to the documentation, he stood 5'8", had a halo of shoulder-length, mousy blonde hair, and the sort of mustache I thought had been outlawed in the 80s. Equally as forgettable was the small Ohio town where he lived. A collection of stoplights and going out of business signs, one of those little slices of Americana our government's trade policies have spent the last 20 years killing. It's the kind of place no one ever moves to, and the only way you leave is in a box. No regional airport for this tiny bird. I'd had to drive an hour through empty cornfields after catching the red-eye. In-flight turbulence had scorched my chances of sleep on the way over, leaving me bleary-eyed as I entered the city limits. Fatigue makes you sloppy. I should have gone straight to my motel and slept. That's what I should have done. Instead, I parked a block down from his house. Stupid. I was so focused on Moynihan's house and my rear view, the banging on my passenger window nearly made me jump a mile. A silver-haired woman who had to be in her 70s stood hunched on the sidewalk, tightly clutching a faded pink robe around her narrow frame. She was peering at me in a mixture of suspicion and annoyance. Behind her, an orange porch light glowed next to an open screen door. Shit, I thought. This was getting worse and worse. No matter where you go, every block has at least one insomniac up watching the street when they should be counting sheep. My sleep-deprived brain scrambled for an excuse it never got to use, because when the window was halfway rolled down, the old woman's face collapsed in on itself as if made of sand. A perfect black oval took its place, from which came a guttural clucking, followed by a sizzling sound as two bony fleshettes whizzed past my face. My hands went for the ignition while shattered glass cascaded across the asphalt. What remained of the old woman reared back bonelessly, arms flopping uselessly at her sides. She opened her mouth and emitted an ear-splitting shriek that shattered the night. Every single porch light on the street flared into life. I floored it. In my experience, most killers aren't Hannibal Lecter. They do what they do primarily because law enforcement is too busy or, more often, too lazy to do the work necessary to stop them. In the decade plus I've been killing killers, there have been maybe a dozen true geniuses. More common is for them to have a googie, my nickname for low-level paranormal or magical entities who motivate or enable the killer in question. What I had never seen before that night, burning rubber down the street of that nowhere Ohio town, was magic on such a grand scale. The houses blazed with a sickly orange light, as though they were operated by a single mind. As I raced up the street, I watched in awe as the houses dissolved into a kind of incandescent mud that rushed together to form a river which began to pour into the road. Block after block melted in front of my eyes, waves of shimmering muck crashing against one another, the river growing into a sea that threatened to overtake my rental car. One hand on the wheel, I dug into my inside pocket for a Sharpie. Whatever was happening, I wasn't going to be able to outrun it much longer. I began hastily scrawling sigils of protection on the windshield. I'm not a wizard or even a magician, and what I know about magic would barely fill more than a handful of pages. Usually, all I need is a little binding spell to hold a googie long enough to put a bullet in its master's face, but this was different. For the first time in years, I was afraid. A career's worth of knowledge unfolded on the glass as that sea surged forward. My back tires were losing traction. I scribbled faster, arcane symbols I'd seen in dreams, glyphs briefly glimpsed in transit between realities. None of them stemmed the tide. The rental's engine whined as its wheels spun in place. The muck flowed over the back window. One last attempt, a rune I'd found tattooed on the inside of a googie's skin. It had been a vicious son of a bitch, short and fat, its wobbling, pustulant skin covered in bony spurs. I'd managed to jam the splintered end of a broken pool cue right through one of its 5 eyes, down into its torso until something popped. I found the rune, a collection of irregular hooks and lines clustered within a narrowing spiral of dots, while prepping the body for cremation. Looking at it had made my eyesight swim the same way it did while I desperately drew it on the dashboard. The swirling tide was rising over the driver's side window. Acrid ozone filled the car's cabin, strong enough to sting the eyes and nostrils. I was forced to write the last hook spline until their completion was announced by a snapping sound and what felt like an electrical current coursing through my body. Blue light flared behind my closed eyes. I jerked involuntarily to some unknown rhythm. When control returned, I could see the tide was no longer surrounding the car. It was now in front of me, arrayed vertically into a skyscraper-sized wall of shimmering incandescent liquid that tapered as it rose. At its peak was a man, or at least something half pretending to be one. It floated downward, drawing the rippling muck with it like a colossal cape. The face was unmistakably that of Wade Moynihan, but the too thin body, covered in carapace-like plating, was not human. If anything, the parts of it visible underneath the armor looked like sticks tightly wrapped in dimpled brown leather. Narrow, venous loops pulsed beneath its surface. Maybe 15 feet away from the car, Moynihan hit the rune's wall of protection and screeched the same way the old woman had. I understood then why this was all so familiar to me. This wasn't a serial killer with a low-level googie. This was the most powerful googie I'd ever seen, deciding to cut out the middleman and become a serial killer. Nothing had prepared me for this. What do we have here? Moynihan, or whatever its name truly was, spoke in a voice like wind through dry glass. A hunter, perhaps, but one who wields knowledge of the unspeakable. Interesting. I wonder if you understand what this is. I wonder, little hunter. I'll ask you next time we meet, unless, of course, the unspeakable claims you before then. Walk soft, little hunter. Sleep lightly. Moynihan's billowing cape curled around him like a cocoon. It drew in tighter and smaller, impossibly so, an incandescent ember hanging in the air no bigger than the stars above. It winked out. The town was gone, and my car sat in a cornfield, stalks swaying soundlessly below an indifferent September sky.
Subject, Ace. User, elnotaway88. Posted, November 6, 1997.
My first job was as a busboy at Happy Steak in Newhall, the home of the Golden Spud, from 1984 to 1988. Like most kitchens, it was hard, unforgiving work, but I liked the rest of the staff and we all got along well. Even the owners, George and Vivian, were good people who made sure we were taken care of. Nowadays, it's not a given that restaurant staff can have a free meal while on shift, but they always made sure you were fed and watered. It was smart management because it kept us happy and that made us open to taking on a little extra work when needed. This could be anything from helping out in the kitchen during lunchtime when folks who worked at the Alpha Beta would fill the place up, or in the shoulder season for deep cleaning. The only downside to working there was that the restaurant was haunted, and not in the whole sometimes people see a gray lady way. No, this was a lot more active than that and could, during certain times of year, get pretty aggressive. Most of the year, it was harmless stuff, the sort of thing you might not even notice unless you knew what to look for. All the tables in the dining room had these little jukebox-style mini TVs that you could put a quarter into and watch. Kids loved those things, but whatever it was that lived in the restaurant loved them even more. People who worked closing shifts would talk about how the TVs would just turn on by themselves, even when the dining room was empty. Every now and again, they'd turn on and off one after the other as if someone or something was moving silently down the aisle. The other mild thing that I remember happening was the mixing up of the flags. When Chef put up the orders, he would stick these little toothpick flags into them to mark out how each had been prepared, rare, medium rare, and so on. He may have been slinging shoe leather in a place that wasn't quite Sizzler, but Chef was particular about making sure folks got what they came for, so he never made a mistake with the flags. Still, if there was a moment when no one happened to be looking at the pass while a steak was on there, when we went to pick it up, the flag would be wrong. It was a little thing, and we had a pretty good system for making sure there were always eyes on the window when food was up, but it happened from time to time. The heavy stuff came at shoulder season and was at its worst during the fall. For this reason, we busboys dreaded deep cleaning, which was mandatory and always happened at night. Guys would get pushed down the stairs or hear voices calling them or sometimes even get scratched, but the one that took the cake happened in my last year at Happy Steak. In '88, I got and was dumped by my first girlfriend, Rita. The whole thing went down just after Rita started her first year at UC Berkeley. She hadn't been up there a week before she called me to say she was a different person than before and felt we were on different paths, which are both code for I'm sleeping with other people. It wasn't exactly a shock. She'd been evasive when I'd asked why she hadn't tried to get into UCLA before Berkeley, but it still hurt. I was drinking a lot, and when deep clean night came around, I just kept going and turned up to the restaurant 3 sheets to the wind. As gracious as George was, if he'd been in that night, I'd have been out on my ass. Luckily for me, he and Vivian were out of town visiting family, so the crew was another busboy, Dave, and 2 of the waitstaff, Melissa and Audrey. We were all cool with each other, and they knew what was going on with Rita, so when I showed up to work drunker than a skunk, they brewed a pot of coffee and let me sleep it off at one of the tables. I don't know exactly what time it was, but I remember being asleep on the table, my head in my arms, when Audrey shook me awake. "Kim, wake up," she said in a whisper. "I need your help." My head was aching, but I had sobered up some, so I grumbled a response and dragged my head up. Audrey was tall and thin, with long blonde hair that went down to the middle of her back. She was giving me a funny look, but then she had also been picking up my slack, so I couldn't blame her too much. "What do you need, Audrey?" "Dave hurt himself. He's downstairs and he needs us to give him a hand." I groaned. "Hurt himself? Isn't he counting down there? How do you hurt yourself counting bags of potatoes?" "I don't know, Kim, but he's hurt. Come on, quickly." With that, she turned and started walking briskly toward back of house. I stood up, trying to ignore the musty taste of booze and cigarettes in my mouth, and followed her. When you walked into the kitchen at Happy Steak, there was a pillar between you and the doorway that went down to cold storage in the basement. I lost sight of Audrey as she crossed behind that pillar and thought I was losing my mind. She was there, then she wasn't. It didn't seem possible. I was on my 5th trip around the pillar when I bumped straight into her, startling her so badly she screamed. "Why are you screaming?" I asked. "You're the one who took off on me." Audrey looked even more confused than I was. "What do you mean? You're the one who disappeared." I felt a strange feeling creep into my guts. She must have seen it in my face because she started looking uncomfortable and just a little pissed off. "Kim, this isn't funny. Is Dave hurt or not?" I stared at her, my stomach starting to sour with apprehension. "You tell me. You're the one who said we had to go downstairs to help him." Audrey, who'd never had a lot of color to begin with, went pale. "When?" "A minute ago. I was sleeping on the table. You woke me up to say that Dave had hurt himself while doing the count, and we had to help him." Just then, the heavy metal door that led from the kitchen to the smoke pit outside crashed shut with a clang, and I smelled the heady smell of weed. Dave walked in from the rear hallway, his eyes glazed. "Where's the emergency?" We both looked at Dave, then at each other. "Who's hurt?" Dave looked puzzled, as if we'd just asked him a riddle. "Melissa. She was in the basement doing the count and hurt herself, right?" It felt like all the air had been sucked out of the kitchen. "Dave?" Audrey asked hesitantly. "Who told you that?" A sneaky smile appeared on Dave's face, like he was being told a joke, and eagerly awaited the punchline. "You did, Ace, like a minute ago." Audrey took a step back. She looked at me, stricken. Before we could say anything else, Melissa's voice came from the other side of the door. "Guys, are you there? I really need your help. I'm stuck." Dave chuckled, too stoned to read the room. Classic Mel. Never send a woman to do an idiot's job. His hand was midway to the knob of the basement door when Audrey dashed forward and grabbed it. She must have had a hell of a grip, because the smile on Dave's face was replaced with wounded annoyance. "Ow, Ace, what the hell? Are we going to help her or not?" Mel's voice, muffled by the door, came through again. "Guys, please come down here, okay? I can't come up. You have to come get me, please. I'm scared." Audrey was still holding Dave's hand, and he looked increasingly unhappy about it. "Ace, let go of my hand. I don't know what your deal is, but Mel needs help." Under her breath, Audrey replied, "Mel isn't here. I sent her home half an hour ago while you were out getting high." Silence. A half smirk came back to Dave's face as he waited for Audrey to crack up, but when he saw the tears beginning to form in her eyes, he knew it wasn't a joke. I turned toward Audrey. "Are you sure she's gone? Maybe she stuck around." Audrey shook her head. Her boyfriend came and picked her up. I watched her get into the car and leave. Whoever that is down there, it isn't Melissa. The thing on the other side of the door must have known the game was up, because it stopped trying to pretend it was Mel. Instead, it spoke in a dry, thin voice that sounded like the wind in dry grass. "You got me, Ace. It's not Melissa. Do you know what I am? I bet you don't. Why don't you come down here and see?" It stretched that last word out until it sounded like a snake's hiss. The three of us drew together, holding hands like little kids frightened of the dark. We jumped in unison as a heavy pounding began to shake the door, the voice dropping into a guttural screech. "Come and play with me. Come and play with me. Come and play with me." I don't know which of us ran first, but within seconds, we were all standing in the smoke pit. With the back door closed, we couldn't hear the banging anymore or that terrible voice. In fact, being outside was like being in a completely different world, and it was hard to imagine that what we'd just seen and heard was real. Dave spoke first. "What do we do? I'm not going back in there, ever." I didn't have an answer, but knew that there was no way I could go back to work on Wednesday like nothing happened. "Ace, what do we do?" Audrey was chewing her lip. She was still pale, but some of the color was coming back into her face. She thought for a moment longer before fixing a cigarette in her mouth and replying, "We leave. This door only opens from the inside, and the front is locked, so no one is going to get in." I couldn't help asking, "What about getting out?" She shook her head as she fished around in her pockets for a lighter. If it could get out, it would have. Whatever it is, it has to stay in that basement. Dave whined, rubbing his hands over his face. "Whatever it is, what are you talking about, Ace?" Finally locating her lighter, she pulled it out and flicked it, a flame springing into life. It lit her face up like a spotlight, and I watched her pull on the cigarette until the cherry burned to a bright red. I have no fucking idea, Dave, and don't ever call me Ace again. She exhaled a cloud of smoke. Are we going or what?
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.